There was a hero in the old stories in Ireland, from the time of the sagas, the time of the Finn cycle, Oisín, who was the son of Finn MacCool, who was the leader of the Fianna. The Fianna, they were a band of warriors and hunters that would come to the aid of chieftains whenever they needed assistance defending their lands against a foe. And they were also, when they weren't called upon to fight for the chieftains and the kings, they were given free rein to roam the countryside of Ireland, hunting and feasting and camping. And they would camp in an area, feast, move on to the next, hunt, feast, move on to the next. One night, after one of these feasts, the lookout sees a rider approaching, and before he can even make the call that someone is coming, the horse is upon him. It's a beautiful milk-white steed, and on the top of it is a beautiful woman, all draped in robes and gowns with a tiara on her head. She introduced herself as Niamh Chin Éir, literally Niamh of the golden head, but we can take from it, it was Niamh of the golden hair. And she was the daughter of MacMahon MacLear, king of the sea. And she asked to meet Oisín. So she was brought to Oisín, and she said to Oisín, Oisín, we have heard tell of you throughout the land, how you are one of the greatest warriors in the Fianna, and how you are one of the greatest hunters in the Fianna, but that you are the best poet and storyteller of the Fianna. And we've heard tales of your prowess and skills back in Tirnanog, where I'm from, and I have come to ask you to join me there, to be my husband, and to regale us with the stories that you have. He wasn't quite sure at first, so he slept on it. But in the morning, after talking with his father and his brothers in the Fianna, he decided, sure, why not? So he gets on the back of the horse behind Niamh, and they take off like a bolt of lightning. And before he even knows it, they are at the sea. And astonished he was, the horse kept galloping. As fast as it could, it galloped so fast that it did not sink into the water. Each crest of wave came up to meet each hoof of the horse as it galloped and galloped and galloped like lightning across the water. And then they were in Tirnanog, and he was brought to the castle, and a great feast was laid out for him. The wedding was performed, the feast was had, stories and songs were told. And then they retired to the bedchamber, and there was the most beautiful feather bed, and they slept together. And this happened day after day. A great feast was had every night. Stories and songs were told, and then they would retire to the bedchamber, to the feather bed, and they would sleep together. He stayed there for what he thought was about 3 years, and he started to get a little tired of it, to be honest. He said to his wife, I wish I could take part in the hunt. I've not had the thrill of the chase of the beast, or feeling the joy of taking its life and it offering its blood to me so that I may bring it back and clean it and cook it for you at the feast. So the next day she brought to him his hunting gear, and they organized a party, and they set out across the green lush lands of Tirnanog, and then they caught the scent of a beautiful stag, and they chased it all day. Back and forth, Oisín and the stag, wandering about each other. Oisín coming closer and closer. It was going so perfect. And at the very last moment, he stuck a blade into the neck of the beast, and it was slain. But everything felt so perfect, too perfect, almost scripted and staged. He didn't have the joy that he was searching and longing for at the moment he took the beast's life. So he wished to clean it, but quickly it was taken from him, and then he was taken back to the hunting camp, and there was suddenly a miniature version of the beautiful castle that he arrived to, and the feast was already laid out, the meat cooked so quickly. Stories were told, songs were sung, and then they retired to a smaller bedchamber, a smaller feather bed, but equally as beautiful and comfortable, and they slept together. Few more nights of hunting, few more of the same, and the time went by, and his wife Niamh could see that there was still a longing in Oisín. And she says to him, my dear, what is wrong with you now? And he says, do you have any enemies in Tirnanog? I miss the thrill of battle and taking on a foe. Do you have anyone that you need to defend your lands against? And the next day she brings his armor to him, and she says, we do have a foe. There is an ogre in a distant land who has taken one of our cousins captive and is holding her in a cave. And so they gathered together a warring party, and they travelled over the lush green lands of Tir na Nog until the landscape turned cold and grey and stony. And they came to the cave, and Oisín challenged the ogre to battle. And the ogre came out, and for 7 days they went at it, suffering blows, each of them all through the day. And each night when the sun went down, the attendants would come and bandage their wounds, and in the morning at sunrise they would go at it again. And at night the attendants would bandage their wounds. And on the 7th day the ogre seemed to tire. Oisín got the upper hand. And when the time came for him to face the ogre in the ogre's final moment and take his life, there was no thrill in it for Oisín. It wasn't like the battles he had known. He felt sad because the entire week again felt scripted and staged. And on the night that he took the ogre's life, there was no feast. He still felt the longing. Niamh could sense it, plain as day. So she says, "What is it now?" And he says, "I wish I could go back to Ireland to visit my father and my brothers in the Fianna and take part in hunting with them and take part in battles with them so that I may come back and tell you and your people more stories." But she was very reluctant to let him go because he was not in Tir na Nog for 3 years. He was in Tir na Nog for 300 years. But she relented, and she brought the horse that they rode in on, and she put him on the back of it, and she said, "Please promise me this. Take the horse to Ireland, but never get off the back of it, so that you may return to me." And he promised, and they were off like a bolt of lightning. Soon they were at the sea, galloping over every wave of each crest came to meet the hooves of the horse. And soon enough, they were in Ireland again, but it was a land changed. He recognized some of the buildings, but only as ruins dotting the landscape. He asked the people about the Fianna, where he might find them, but no one knew what he was talking about. He found some older people, and he introduced himself as Oisín, and they say, "Oh, Oisín died years ago if he ever existed. And the Fianna, they were stories we heard as children, and if they were true, they were long, long gone." He was sad. He was forlorn. And he just rode the horse around the countryside, feeling useless. And then he came to a field where people were trying to clear it of stones, and there was a very large stone that wouldn't budge. And he's a very strong, young, strapping man. And he goes over and offers his assistance, but remembering his promise that he made, he stayed on the horse. He held tightly to the mane, and he leaned over and used his arm to try to leverage the stone out of the ground. But he slipped, and he fell to the ground. And when he touched the soil, the people around him did not believe what they witnessed with their own eyes. This once strong, strapping, handsome, beautiful man before their very eyes began to wither. His skin began to wrinkle. His eyes became sallow. He crooked at the back, and he crumbled to the ground into dust.